The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Kensington Palace as 10-year-old Prince George walked alongside his protection officer, Detective Sergeant Michael Harrison. It was a typical Tuesday in early autumn, with golden leaves dancing in the crisp breeze. George had just finished his morning lessons with his private tutor and was eager to explore the palace grounds before lunch. Michael Harrison had been assigned to Prince George's security detail for nearly 3 years. A decorated officer with 15 years of service in the Metropolitan Police, he had protected numerous high-profile individuals, but working with the young prince had become something special. George wasn't just another assignment, he was a bright, curious boy who asked endless questions about everything from police procedures to Michael's childhood in Wales. "Michael, why do you always check your radio every few minutes?" George asked, skipping slightly to match the officer's longer stride. His school uniform was pristine, though his tie was slightly askew from the morning's activities. "It's protocol, Your Royal Highness," Michael replied with a gentle smile. "We need to stay connected with the security team to ensure everything runs smoothly." George nodded thoughtfully. Despite his royal upbringing, he had always been encouraged by his parents, Prince William and Catherine, to treat staff members with respect and genuine interest. The young prince had developed a particular fondness for Michael, who never spoke down to him and always answered his questions honestly. As they walked past the palace gardens, George noticed Michael pause slightly, his hand moving to his chest. The officer's breathing seemed a bit labored, but he quickly composed himself when he noticed George watching. "Are you feeling all right, Michael?" George asked with concern that seemed mature beyond his years. "Just a bit tired, sir. Long shift yesterday," Michael replied, though there was something in his voice that didn't quite convince the observant young prince. The truth was, Michael had been experiencing chest pains for several weeks. As a man in his early 40s who prided himself on physical fitness, he had initially dismissed the discomfort as stress, or perhaps pulled muscles from his workout routine. The demanding nature of royal protection work, with its irregular hours and constant vigilance, often took a toll on officers' health. Michael's wife, Sarah, had been urging him to see a doctor for days. She had noticed him waking up short of breath and seen him clutching his chest during quiet moments at home. But Michael was stubborn, believing that admitting to health problems might jeopardize his position. He loved his job and felt honored to protect the royal family, particularly young Prince George, who had become like a nephew to him. "Michael, do you have children?" George asked as they continued their walk, genuine curiosity lighting up his blue eyes. "No, Your Royal Highness. My wife and I haven't been blessed with children yet," Michael replied softly. It was a sensitive topic for him and Sarah, who had been trying to start a family for years without success. "Well, I think you'd make a brilliant father," George said with the innocent honesty that only children possess. "You're always patient, even when I ask too many questions." The comment touched Michael deeply. Working with George had filled a void in his life that he hadn't fully acknowledged. The boy's enthusiasm for learning, his kindness toward others, and his genuine care for people around him reminded Michael daily of why this job was more than just professional duty. As they approached the main palace building, George suddenly stopped walking. His young face was serious as he studied Michael's pale complexion and the way the officer was breathing more heavily than usual after their leisurely walk. "Michael, you don't look well at all," George said, his voice filled with worry. "I think you should sit down." Before Michael could protest, George had already spotted a nearby bench in the palace garden. With the natural authority that came from his royal upbringing, but tempered with genuine concern, he guided the officer toward the seat. "Your Royal Highness, I'm quite all right," Michael insisted, though he was grateful for the chance to rest. The chest pains had been getting stronger throughout the morning, and he was beginning to feel dizzy. George sat beside him on the bench, his small frame a stark contrast to Michael's tall, uniformed figure. The boy's concern was evident as he watched the officer's labored breathing. "My grandmother always says that taking care of people is the most important duty anyone can have," George said thoughtfully. "She tells me that being royal isn't about titles or palaces. It's about serving others and making sure they're safe and happy." Michael looked at the young prince with amazement. Despite being only 10 years old, George was displaying wisdom and compassion that many adults never developed. The officer realized that the boy was not just making conversation, but was genuinely worried about his well-being. "You remind me of your father at your age," Michael said, his voice warm despite the discomfort he was feeling. "I've heard stories from the older officers about how Prince William used to worry about the staff and always made sure everyone was included." George beamed at the comparison to his father. Prince William was his hero, and knowing that he shared his father's caring nature filled him with pride. As they sat together on the bench, surrounded by the beautiful palace gardens, Michael felt another sharp pain in his chest. This time he couldn't hide his discomfort completely. He gripped the armrest of the bench and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. George noticed immediately. Without hesitation, the young prince moved closer to Michael, his small hand resting gently on the officer's arm. "Michael, I'm going to call for help," George said with quiet determination. "This isn't normal, and I'm worried about you." "Please, Your Royal Highness, there's no need to cause alarm," Michael protested weakly. "I just need a moment to rest." But George had already made up his mind. With the same decisiveness that would one day serve him well as a future king, he reached for Michael's radio, which was clipped to the officer's tactical vest. "I know how to use this," George said confidently. "You taught me the emergency codes last month, remember?" Michael was touched by the boy's determination to help, but he was also concerned about the protocol breach. Royal family members were not supposed to use security equipment, and there would certainly be questions asked if Prince George was heard over the police radio network. "Sir, please, let me handle this," Michael said, reaching for the radio with a shaking hand. But George had already pressed the emergency button. His young voice, clear and authoritative despite his age, came through the radio system. "This is Prince George. I need immediate medical assistance for Officer Michael Harrison at the Palace Gardens. Please send help now." The radio crackled to life immediately as various security personnel responded to the unprecedented call. Within moments, footsteps could be heard running across the courtyard as the palace security team mobilized. Michael looked at the young prince with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Despite knowing that using the radio would likely result in questions and possible reprimands for both of them, George had put Michael's health above all other considerations. "Thank you, sir," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You may have just saved my life." George smiled, his blue eyes bright with determination. "Michael, you protect me every day. Today it's my turn to protect you." As the sound of approaching medical personnel grew closer, Michael realized that this moment would change everything. Not just because of his health scare, but because he had witnessed something extraordinary in the young prince. George had shown the kind of leadership, compassion, and quick thinking that would serve him well throughout his life. The palace gardens, usually a place of peaceful tranquility, suddenly became a hub of activity as paramedics and security officers arrived on the scene. But in the midst of all the commotion, Michael would never forget the image of 10-year-old Prince George, sitting calmly beside him on the bench, his small hand still resting protectively on the officer's arm. This was the beginning of a story that would resonate throughout the palace for years to come, the day a young prince put protocol aside to help a friend in need, and in doing so, demonstrated the very best of what royal service truly meant. The palace medical team arrived within 3 minutes of George's emergency call, their professional training evident as they quickly assessed Michael's condition. Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, the palace physician, knelt beside the bench where Michael sat, her experienced hands already checking his pulse while her assistant prepared portable monitoring equipment. "Officer Harrison, can you describe what you're feeling?" Dr. Thornton asked, her voice calm and reassuring despite the urgency of the situation. "Chest pains? Difficulty breathing?" Michael replied, his voice strained. "It's been happening for a few weeks, but today it's much worse." George remained close to Michael's side, his young face etched with concern. Despite the arrival of medical professionals and security personnel, the prince showed no inclination to step away or let others take over completely. His protective instinct toward his friend was evident to everyone present. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps you should step back and let the medical team work," suggested Inspector David Clark, the head of palace security, who had arrived shortly after the paramedics. "No, I'm staying with Michael," George replied firmly, his voice carrying an authority that surprised the adults around him. "He was taking care of me, and now I'm taking care of him." Dr. Thornton glanced at the young prince with admiration. She had been treating the royal family for over a decade and had watched George grow from a toddler into a thoughtful, caring boy. His refusal to abandon his friend in a moment of crisis demonstrated remarkable character for someone his age. "That's perfectly fine, Your Royal Highness," Dr. Thornton said gently. "Sometimes having a friend nearby is the best medicine." As the medical team worked, George noticed that Michael's hand was trembling. Without hesitation, the young prince reached over and took the officer's hand in both of his own, providing comfort in the simplest but most meaningful way possible. "Everything's going to be all right, Michael," George said softly. "The doctors are here now, and they're going to help you feel better." Michael squeezed George's small hands gratefully. In all his years of protective service, he had never imagined that the roles would be reversed like this, with the person he was meant to protect becoming his protector in a moment of vulnerability. The portable heart monitor began beeping steadily, and Dr. Thornton's expression grew more serious as she reviewed the readings. "Officer Harrison, I believe you're experiencing cardiac distress. We need to get you to hospital immediately for proper evaluation and treatment." "Hospital?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. "But I'm supposed to be on duty. Prince George needs protection." "Michael, the only thing I need is for you to get better," George interjected, his voice steady despite his young age. "There are other officers here, and my safety isn't as important as your health right now." Inspector Clark stepped forward. Having observed the interaction between the prince and his protection officer with growing respect, "Your Royal Highness, I'll personally ensure your security while Officer Harrison receives medical attention." "Thank you, Inspector Clark," George replied politely, then turned back to Michael. "See? Everything is arranged. You can go to the hospital without worrying about me." As the paramedics prepared to transport Michael, George suddenly stood up with determination. "I want to go with him," he announced, causing a stir among the security personnel. "Your Royal Highness, that's not possible," Inspector Clark said gently but firmly. "Hospital visits require advanced security arrangements and approval from your parents." George's face fell slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. "Then I want to call my father, right now." Dr. Thornton recognized the urgency of getting Michael to the hospital quickly, but she also understood the young prince's emotional need to ensure his friend's well-being. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps we could arrange for you to speak with Officer Harrison once he's settled at the hospital." "Yes, that would work," George agreed, though it was clear he wasn't entirely satisfied with the compromise. "But I want to be told everything about how he's doing. No one should hide anything from me just because I'm 10 years old." Michael, despite his physical discomfort, was deeply moved by George's fierce loyalty. "Sir, I promise I'll ask the doctors to keep you informed about my condition, and I'll call you as soon as I'm feeling better." "You promise?" George asked, his blue eyes searching Michael's face for reassurance. "I promise," Michael replied solemnly. As the paramedics prepared to move Michael to the ambulance, George leaned closer to his friend. "Michael, remember what you taught me about being brave? You said that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Michael nodded, remembering the conversation they'd had weeks earlier when George had been nervous about a public appearance. "Well, you need to be brave now," George continued. "Go to the hospital, let the doctors help you, and get better so you can come back to work. But most importantly, get better so we can keep being friends." Tears welled up in Michael's eyes at the young prince's words. In his 15 years of police service, he had received commendations, medals, and recognition from superiors. But nothing had ever touched him as deeply as this moment of genuine care from a 10-year-old boy. "I'll be brave, sir," Michael whispered. "And when I come back, maybe you can show me more of those magic tricks your Uncle Harry taught you." George grinned, the first real smile he'd shown since Michael's health scare began. "It's a deal, but I warn you I've learned 3 new ones since you've been gone." As the paramedics lifted Michael onto the stretcher, George walked alongside them as far as protocol would allow. The young prince's small figure seemed even tinier next to the tall medical personnel and security officers, but his presence commanded respect from everyone present. At the palace entrance, where the ambulance waited, George finally had to say goodbye. Inspector Clark gently placed a hand on the prince's shoulder, understanding that this moment was difficult for the young boy. "Officer Harrison will receive the best medical care available," Inspector Clark assured George. "The palace has arrangements with the finest cardiac specialists in London." "Good," George replied, his voice strong despite the emotion he was clearly feeling. "Michael deserves the very best." As the ambulance doors closed, George pressed his face to the window of the palace entrance, watching until the vehicle disappeared from sight. The young prince stood there for several long minutes, his small frame silhouetted against the grand architecture of the palace. Dr. Thornton approached George gently. "Your Royal Highness, what you did today was extraordinary. Officer Harrison is lucky to have such a caring friend." George turned to face the doctor, his expression serious beyond his years. "Dr. Thornton, will you make sure the hospital doctors know how important Michael is? Not just because he works for our family, but because he's a really good person who deserves to be taken care of?" "I'll make sure they know," Dr. Thornton promised, struck by the prince's maturity and compassion. Inspector Clark stepped forward, having just finished coordinating with the hospital security team. "Your Royal Highness, I've spoken with the medical team. Officer Harrison is in stable condition, and the doctors are confident they can help him." "Thank you for telling me the truth," George replied gratefully. "Sometimes adults think children can't handle serious information, but I'd rather know what's really happening." As they walked back into the palace, George's mind was already working on his next steps. He wanted to call his parents to inform them about the situation, not because he needed permission, but because he felt they should know about Michael's health and the extraordinary circumstances of the day. The palace corridors seemed quieter than usual as George made his way to the private family quarters. The events of the morning had changed something fundamental in how he viewed his role and responsibilities. He had always known that being royal meant serving others. But today he had experienced what that service truly meant on a personal level. In his room, George sat at his small desk and began writing a letter to Michael, knowing that the officer would appreciate having something personal to read during his recovery. The young prince wrote about their friendship, about the things they would do together when Michael returned, and about how grateful he was for all the lessons the officer had taught him. As the afternoon light filtered through the palace windows, George reflected on the morning's events. He had acted purely on instinct, driven by genuine concern for a friend who needed help. The boy didn't yet fully understand the impact his actions would have on everyone who witnessed them, but he knew with certainty that he had done the right thing. The young prince's tender gesture had indeed silenced the palace, not with shock or disapproval, but with profound respect for a boy who had shown that true nobility came not from titles or traditions, but from the willingness to put others' needs above one's own comfort and protocol. 3 hours after the ambulance had departed from Kensington Palace, Prince George sat in his father's study, having just finished recounting the morning's events to Prince William and Catherine. His parents had listened intently as their eldest son described Michael's health scare and the decisions he had made in response to the emergency. Prince William leaned back in his chair, studying his son with a mixture of pride and amazement. "George, what you did today showed remarkable judgment and compassion. You potentially saved Officer Harrison's life." "I just did what felt right," George replied simply. "Michael has always taken care of me. When he needed help, I couldn't just stand there and do nothing." Catherine reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "Darling, you showed true leadership today, but I want you to understand something important. Your safety is always our primary concern. In future emergencies, you must also ensure your own protection while helping others." "I understand, Mummy," George said thoughtfully. "But Michael taught me that sometimes protecting someone means taking risks for them. He does that for our family every day." The wisdom in George's words struck both his parents deeply. They had always encouraged their children to treat palace staff with respect and kindness, but witnessing their 10-year-old son internalize these values so completely was both touching and impressive. Prince William's phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. "George, I just received an update. Officer Harrison is stable and responding well to treatment. The doctors say he had what they call unstable angina, which could have led to a heart attack if left untreated." George's eyes widened with understanding. "So calling for help really did save his life?" "Yes, son. Your quick thinking and decisive action prevented a potentially life-threatening situation." The weight of this realization settled over George, but rather than making him feel burdened, it reinforced his belief that he had done the right thing. The young prince had acted on instinct and compassion, but the outcome validated the importance of trusting those instincts when someone needed help. "Can we visit Michael at the hospital?" George asked hopefully. Prince William and Catherine exchanged glances, both recognizing their son's genuine need to see his friend and ensure his well-being. "We can arrange a private visit tomorrow," Catherine said gently. "The hospital staff will need time tonight to complete their initial treatment and assessment." "Thank you," George said, visibly relieved. "I wrote him a letter, and I want to give it to him personally." Later that evening, word of Prince George's actions had spread throughout the palace staff. The story was told with admiration and respect, how the young prince had recognized a medical emergency, taken charge of the situation, and refused to abandon his friend despite protocol concerns. Mrs. Angela Foster, the palace's head housekeeper, who had worked for the royal family for over 20 years, found herself in tears as she heard the account from Dr. Thornton. "That boy has the heart of a true king," she said to her colleague. "He understood that real leadership means caring for the people who serve with you, not just being served by them." In the security office, Inspector Clark was briefing the evening shift about the day's events. His usual professional demeanor softened as he described George's unwavering loyalty to Officer Harrison. "I've protected members of this family for 8 years," Inspector Clark told his team, "and today I witnessed something extraordinary. Prince George didn't just follow protocol or defer to adults in authority. He saw a friend in distress and took immediate action to help, regardless of the personal or procedural consequences." The younger officers listened intently, many of them moved by the story. Officer James Mitchell, who had recently joined the Royal Protection Unit, raised his hand. "Sir, what does this mean for how we interact with the royal children going forward?" Inspector Clark considered the question carefully. It means we remember that we're not just protecting future monarchs. We're working alongside young people who are learning what service and leadership truly mean. Today, Prince George taught us as much about those values as we've taught him. Meanwhile, at St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington, Michael Harrison lay in his hospital bed, reading George's handwritten letter for the third time. The careful penmanship and thoughtful words brought tears to his eyes each time he read them. "Dear Michael," the letter began, "I hope you are feeling better and that the doctors are taking good care of you. I wanted you to know that today was scary for me, but not because of any danger to myself. I was scared because my friend was hurting, and I wasn't sure how to help." The letter continued. "You have taught me so many important things during our time together. You taught me that being strong doesn't mean you never need help, and that being brave means doing what's right even when it's difficult. Today, you needed help, and I tried to be strong and brave the way you taught me." Michael paused in his reading, overwhelmed by the maturity and emotional intelligence displayed in the young prince's words. The letter concluded, "Please get better soon, not just because I miss our walks and conversations, but because the world needs good people like you to be healthy and happy. Your friend always, George." Dr. Sarah Chen, the cardiologist treating Michael, entered his room for the evening checkup. She noticed the letter in his hands and the emotional expression on his face. "Good news from home?" Dr. Chen asked kindly. "A letter from Prince George," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The young man who probably saved my life today." Dr. Chen had heard about the unusual circumstances of Michael's admission, how a 10-year-old prince had recognized the medical emergency and called for help. "You know, in my 20 years of cardiology, I've rarely seen such quick recognition and response to cardiac symptoms, especially from someone so young. His actions definitely prevented a more serious cardiac event." "He's an extraordinary boy," Michael said proudly. "I've had the privilege of protecting him for 3 years, but today he protected me." The next morning arrived crisp and bright, with Prince George waking early in anticipation of visiting Michael at the hospital. He had carefully selected a small gift, a book about famous police officers throughout history that he thought his friend would enjoy during his recovery. The family's convoy arrived at St. Mary's Hospital at 10 a.m., with Prince William, Catherine, and George traveling together in their official vehicle. The hospital had made special arrangements for the royal visit, ensuring privacy while maintaining the medical facility's normal operations. George walked through the hospital corridors with quiet dignity, his small hand clasping the gift bag containing his book and letter. Despite his young age, he understood the gravity of hospitals and the importance of respecting the healing environment. When they reached Michael's room, George paused outside the door, suddenly feeling nervous about seeing his friend in a hospital setting. Prince William noticed his son's hesitation and knelt down to George's level. "It's all right to feel worried," Prince William said gently. "Hospitals can be intimidating places, even for adults. But remember, Michael is getting better, and seeing you will probably be the best medicine he could receive." George nodded, took a deep breath, and knocked gently on the door before entering. Michael's face lit up the moment he saw the young prince, and any nervousness George had felt immediately disappeared. "Michael!" George exclaimed, rushing to his friend's bedside. "You look much better than yesterday." "I feel much better thanks to you," Michael replied, his voice strong and clear. "The doctors told me that your quick thinking prevented a heart attack. You saved my life, George." George blushed slightly at the praise, but maintained his composure. "I brought you something," he said, presenting the gift bag. "It's a book about police heroes throughout history. I thought you might like reading about other officers who were brave and helpful like you." Michael accepted the gift with visible emotion. "Thank you, sir. This means more to me than you'll ever know." Prince William and Catherine watched the interaction between their son and his protection officer with deep respect. They could see the genuine friendship that had developed between the two, transcending the formal boundaries of their official relationship. "Officer Harrison," Prince William said, stepping forward, "Catherine and I want to personally thank you for your dedicated service to our family. And we want you to know that George's actions yesterday have made us incredibly proud parents. Your Royal Highness, it has been my honor to serve your family," Michael replied. "And working with Prince George has taught me as much about courage and compassion as I hope I've taught him about duty and service." Dr. Chen entered the room to check on her patient and was introduced to the royal family. "Officer Harrison is responding excellently to treatment," she reported. "With proper medication and some lifestyle adjustments, he should make a complete recovery." "When can Michael come back to work?" George asked directly. Dr. Chen smiled at the boy's straightforward question. "Well, Your Royal Highness, Officer Harrison will need several weeks of recovery and cardiac rehabilitation before returning to active duty. But he should be able to resume light activities within a few days." George turned to Michael with a serious expression. "Michael, I want you to promise me that you'll follow all of the doctor's instructions and take as much time as you need to get completely better. Don't come back to work until you're absolutely ready." "I promise, sir," Michael replied, touched by the young prince's continued concern for his well-being. As their visit continued, George shared stories about his activities since Michael had been in the hospital, carefully avoiding any mention of how quiet and worried he had been. Michael, in turn, told George about the excellent care he was receiving and how much the prince's letter had meant to him. When it was time to leave, George approached Michael's bedside one final time. "Michael, yesterday you taught me something very important. You taught me that true friendship means being there for each other when it really matters, not just during the good times." Michael nodded, understanding that this experience had deepened their bond beyond their professional relationship. "And you taught me something important too, George. You showed me that real leadership isn't about giving orders or following protocol. It's about recognizing when someone needs help and having the courage to provide it." As the royal family prepared to depart, George made one final request. "Michael, when you come back to work, can we have longer walks in the garden? I have so many questions about everything that's happened, and I want to learn more about being someone others can count on." "I would be honored to continue those conversations," Michael replied, "and I suspect I'll learn as much from you as you learn from me." The story of Prince George's tender gesture had indeed silenced the palace, but not with shock or criticism. Instead, it had filled the royal household with profound respect for a young prince who had demonstrated that true nobility came from the heart, not from titles or tradition. As the royal convoy departed from the hospital, George pressed his face to the window, waving goodbye to the building where his friend was recovering. The 10-year-old prince had learned valuable lessons about friendship, responsibility, and leadership that would serve him well throughout his life. Michael Harrison would return to duty 6 weeks later, fully recovered and with a renewed appreciation for both his work and the extraordinary young man he was privileged to protect. The bond forged between them during that crisis would endure for years to come, serving as a reminder that the most meaningful relationships are built on mutual respect, genuine care, and the willingness to put others' needs above one's own. In the months that followed, the story of Prince George's compassionate response to his friend's medical emergency would become legendary within palace circles, not as a tale of a young royal breaking protocol, but as an inspiring example of what it truly meant to serve others with dignity, courage, and love.